Dear audience, thank you very much for your patience. I apologize on behalf of myself and of Euromoney that we've kept you waiting for what I know, even though there aren't that many of us here, will be a very interesting panel. What we're going to try and do is to give you an overview of the fintech and digital financial ecosystem world in the space of about 30 to 35 minutes. We don't want, I know it's late, so we don't want to keep you too long. And we will give you the opportunity to, sorry, David's trying to get some more people in here. We'll give you the opportunity to ask some questions. And I'll do that early on into the discussion. I just have to find my list of topic points. So, the first thing I'm going to do is to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So, Peter, why don't you say who you are and what you do, and then Charles, and finally Emre.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter England. I run Zurich's.
Try go as close as.
Is this,
yeah,
is
just sort
okay?
of. You have
Good.
to speak sort of right into it.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Richard. I'm Peter England. I run Zurich's activities here in Middle East and Africa out of Dubai and the DIFC.
Okay, thank you. Charles.
Charles Habak. I'm a vice president with Booz Allen Hamilton. I lead the banking and fintech business across the region, and I've been here for about 10 years.
Again, are you based in Dubai or?
I'm based out of Dubai, yes.
Dubai. Okay, but a frequent visitor, I'm sure,
visitor.
to all of these lovely places. And finally, Emre.
Emre Carter. I run Bank's transactional banking business, treasury and trade solutions for Middle East, North Africa, including Pakistan and Turkey. And based out of the IFC and Dubai, I've been in the region for 2 years now.
Do you like it? You have to say yes to that. How much do you like it? I love the region, as everybody knows. So, Peter, now, and I'm going to ask all of this. The first 5 minutes, I set the task of my wonderful panelists. They come from slightly different parts of the digital ecosystem. So I'm hoping to get a variety of different perspectives. But what I wanted to start with is to unpack this word fintech. It has been used, thrown about today by many people, myself included, but also used very positively by His Excellency the Governor, who's just walked behind you, of SAMA. It's front of mind. But I, for one, probably the only one, I'm not really sure exactly what it means. So I'm going to start with you, Peter. What does fintech mean to you, both in a broad sense and also as relevant to Zurich and the insurance business?
I think first, and let me approach this with an insurance angle, then I think it's fair to note that the digital tools around us are getting increasingly important. We also see things like insurance penetration here in the kingdom increasing drastically for the last number of years. And for us as insurance carriers, that means both a number of opportunities, of course, but there is also risks involved. What it means for us is that we can operate leaner, more efficiently. We can address our operational platform. We can look at distribution models in a much more efficient way and much more in line with customer needs. But more importantly, we can also develop adequate protection for our customers. We often refer to it as cyber liability or security of privacy. You may have heard different terms, but that's in short what it means for us.
When you say you can develop efficient sort of cyber liability for your customers, now is that I want to understand this properly. Is that using digital or cyber methodology and technology in order to provide normal liability, or is cyber liability something different?
So the term really has evolved from third-party professional liability insurance. Mm-hmm. That's where it started. And this was being sold mainly to, say, professional service firms who had, say, a cyber exposures or of some kind. And then what we've seen now lately is that we've seen more standalone first-party security and privacy products being developed,
And
protecting both from data losses, different kinds of regulatory costs or investigation costs, and libel and slander, among other exposures.
Right, so I'm running my company. I come to you. You write me a policy that insures me against my digital liabilities. So if something goes wrong with my database, I get hacked or whatever, you provide a way of having cover for that. So
Yes,
it mitigates my digital risk.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And I must say I welcome as well Sama's comments earlier in this regard. They welcome more cyber protection here locally in Saudi Arabia. There are local cover being sort of under development now, and clearly this is something that we want to support and sponsor.
We'll come back to that, but just very briefly, so what you're saying is that Sama get this, Sama understand the importance of this. It's something in their mind to be doing, to provide, to ensure that the Saudi market has access to those products.
That's my impression, definitely. I think the threat is very real to all of us, and we have to approach this both on a sort of a proactive and reactive manner.
We're going to come to talk about the threats a little later and the risk side.
Yes.
So that's what it means to you. It's actually very. I'm going to come back to sort of work that through, because you said a number of things in that. But let's go to Charles next. And what does, same question to you, Charles. So again, you have a broader look. What does fintech mean to you and to Buzan and Hamilton?
It's a great question. I think that we often get caught up in discussions around fintech, and actually we're all talking about different things. Fintech, for me, what it's not is technology for technology's sake. Fintech for me is new business models in the financial services space that are embedded or intended for the digital era. So how do we go about providing new business models that cater to a digital generation and a digital era? And how do we best cater to the needs of our users in that era? And I think if you think about fintech, if you break it down, they're really, the easiest way to think about it in terms of where the prominent efforts are being spent today are really in 5 areas. You have payments, which has been the traditional space of fintech. You have lending and equity funding, which is another prominent space. You increasingly have, anything around financial management and wealth management. You also have, it's small, but it's growing around capital markets. And finally, everything around loyalty and rewards. So those are kind of like the...
What was I couldn't hear. What was the last one?
The last one was anything around loyalty and rewards.
Loyalty, yeah.
So those 5 categories are an easy way to kind of rationalize what fintech is all about. And if you want to think about it from an investment standpoint, well, guess what? Today, 90% of all investments are focused on the first 2, and that's payments and that's lending. So that gives you a nice kind of framework to think a little bit about what is fintech and how can it be applied in everyday life.
Okay. As always with these answers, which is a very good, comprehensive answer. I have even more questions than I did when I started. Emery, I mean, you're number one of that 90%, the payment side of things. I rather dismissively described it as plumbing, but it's vitally important to the stability, the growth, and the efficiency of the financial system that the payments segment is as efficient as possible. How is fintech, what does it mean to you? It may not mean the same thing. And what difference has it made to what you do in your business? How has it changed things over the past couple of years, and where do you see it changing it in the next few years?
Look, I think we're in the age of digital disruption, right? And we've seen industry players or industries itself in the last 10 years, upside down, disrupted in a way that the existing players for, let's say, dominating their industries for 90 years have been almost, disappeared overnight. and there are businesses created from zero to multi-billion-dollar businesses in less than 3 years. So fintech for me is obviously a innovative use of technology in design and delivery of financial services, claiming a better client experience, a better user sort of, friendliness, and as well as claiming that disintermediating the existing players in the industry, which are mainly, in a lot of the cases, it's banks. So to the second part of your question, I think, yes, I agree with Charles, by the way. Fintech, I think it's not a new phenomenon. And financial industry itself, for the last 50, 60 years, has been forefronts of the innovation, be it the ATM machine, be it the credit cards, how we make it global and scale and really the mainstream of the payments and so on and so forth. But we are having, last 10, 15 years for the whole industry was not as easy as, as it can be. And we had some internal issues and in particular countries, then it became some sort of a global sort of a disruption in itself. And where I think, again, this industry needs to learn how to re-innovate and put the client in the center of everything what we do. And that's why I think, fintech or the success of the fintech or some parts of the, sub parts that they've been sort of, targeting is a good wake-up moment for all of us and as banks for, to rethink our approach to bring on new services and new products to the market and redefine this client centricity.
Charles, I'm going to come back to you with the sort of follow-up question. A lot of fintech per se, as is commonly discussed, seems to be about doing more or less the same thing, but doing it more efficiently. So it's taking out staff, it's speeding it up, it's reducing costs, it's reducing risks, all that sort of thing. But it's not fundamentally doing anything different. It's not enabling, totally new ways of doing things. You touched on this idea, and I'll quote your words back to you as saying that it's new business models in the financial space. Now, new business models are one thing, but is fintech as a whole, does it have the potential to create actual new businesses? Does it enable customers or banks or insurance companies to do things that they couldn't do before?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that it's important to think about the customer first. And the need of the customer hasn't really changed at its core, but how they want certain financial services provided to them, how they want to consume financial services, has fundamentally changed in this digital era. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you think about new business models, so if you take an old business model and you just try to change the interface to the customer, you're going to tweak and improve some things, but you're not going to fundamentally change that experience. Mm-hmm. If you turn 180 degrees, as Emre was saying, and you start with the customer, and from the customer you design a business model that makes sense to them, and it might have a completely different price point, it might have a different service, but ultimately, fundamentally, it's still a loan, or it's still fundamentally a payment, but it comes wrapped in a completely different experience and a completely different way of going about things.
Mm-hmm. And what are the component parts? I hope I ask this in a meaningful way. What are the pieces that you need to have in order to make fintech work? I mean, looking at things like cloud, looking at machine learning, IoT, all these different pieces. Which are the bits of this ecosystem that are necessary to be the platform on which real innovative and different fintech can be built?
I think that it's really not a technology play. I think you can do a lot with different types of technology. I think if you think of fintech and making fintech work, again, I'm going to go back to 5 things, which I think are important.
That's fine.
I think you need a business and regulatory environment that supports it. One of the biggest hurdles we've seen in the region have been on the business or regulatory front, and that's been improving quite a bit. But you want to make sure you have that right environment in place. The second thing is you need to make sure that the ecosystem of fintech has access to financing, and that means both early stage and late stage. You can't have one without the other. You also have to think about the infrastructure in place, and I think that's some of the points that you raised on, IoT and cloud and whatnot. Is there an enabling infrastructure in place? And the last 2 things are, you need to have a talent base in the country or in the city that's well-versed when it comes to entrepreneurship and tech, and making sure that you can, piggyback on programs in universities or programs in schools whereby you have that talent pool. And finally, and perhaps, which I should have started with that's the demand. You have to have a user base that's really adept to wanting to use digital tools. And if we think about the kingdom, we absolutely have an extremely digital savvy population. So you have about half of the population under the age of 25. Smartphone penetration is one of the highest in the world at around 65%. Social media, 3 accounts per user on average. That's 7th globally. 90 million YouTube videos seen each and every day. So this is an extremely digital savvy landscape. And now we have to think a little bit about what are the barriers that we are facing that are hindering that landscape to making use of fintech when it comes to things like payments and loans and so on and so forth, and what type of frictions exist in the financial system for these customers.
Thank you. Peter, 2-part question to you. First of all, it's really a repeat of partially the question I asked to the others, but does, with the exception of providing insurance to insure against digital problems, does the advent of this horrible catch-all term, fintech, enable the insurance business to do anything that it couldn't do before? That's the first part. And the second part is, and I want to move on to this, and you're an insurance guy, so what are the risks? What could go wrong with the deployment or increasing use of technology in the broader financial system? I know that's two big questions, but
let me approach that question. Sorry. Let me approach that question in 2 ways. First, let me just define. I think we see the most impact, of course, in the retail space. We look at both. We separate between the retail and the commercial side of the business. The commercial remains quite sophisticated, very tailor-made proposition still. And in terms of disruptive elements, I see them more in the retail space. What kind of different products? I think a key differentiator today is data and how you utilize that data, and that will bring us to certain new, even more tailor-made products like what Charles is mentioning, even in the retail space. I think also what new kind of products you will see more better and more improved cyber products with more more appropriate extensions and more relevant to our customers going forward.
Okay, so there is scope within that, not just simply to do what you do now better, but actually to do new things, to provide new products for people who may not be insured or cover risks that they may not have known. So that's great. So, but thank you for that. The first part. Second part. What are the risks as far as you're concerned?
The challenge for the industry, in short, when we started, has been very much to quantify these losses. That has been because you deal with an exposure base which is similar to what you saw on the bank, say on the operational risk side, when you had losses like the Nick Lees and Barings Bank loss, that more high severity, low frequency losses. So you have quite a little database to work from when you try to price the covers. But that's, of course, something that is improving day by day and an area which we are addressing.
That's a fascinating. I'd never thought about how you would do that. If I'm a bank, I have a data loss.
Yep.
So I'm asking you this question, but how do you go about quantifying the value of that? How do you know? I mean, what's that data worth?
So first of all, we have actuarial support for that, but we separate between different losses. We have so-called attrition losses, more high frequency, low severity losses, and there you have a lot of data. You can take things like motor exposures, for instance. You can quite accurately calculate a sustainable premium. And then, of course, on the other spectrum, you have more as I mentioned, the Nick Lees and Baringsbank type losses, where you have little data, and there you have to simply apply a suitable model. There are various ways you can do that with sort of extreme value theory, etc. But that's data. That's my main point. Is definitely an advantage here.
The thing about data, okay, and I'm being thick here, but so if I'm a bank and I mess around in a sort of Leeson-esque way, or even not ever, and I lose $1 billion, I no longer have $1 billion. Right? If I lose data, that data's been copied. I still have the data. It hasn't disappeared. It hasn't been stolen, and it's not gone. It's there, but someone else has it. Now, how do you, without a regulatory environment that penalizes the bank for losing X many pieces of data, how do you value that? I mean, I know it's bad for my customers. Is it the cost of redoing the security? It's
normally the loss as defined by a court, how they would define the loss itself, and that's where it's.
And are there courts in this part of the world that are capable of making judgments on that, or is it something that would be arbitrated elsewhere? Sorry, I mustn't go too much down the rabbit hole, but I'd never thought of it before.
Yeah. No, but it's clearly room for development, I believe, for all players, and it also depends on what courts you're looking at.
Okay. We shouldn't go too far, but I like all of these things. As soon as you start scratching the surface,
no, of course.
I find it intellectually very interesting. Emre, same sort of question to you. Most of the media and things, it's a buzzword. It's an excitement. FinTech is great, but what are the risks of this? I mean, the more digital that the financial system goes, the more digital we all are in our interaction with it. There must be both systemic risks. And risks within the system. And as a commercial bank, how do you manage those data-related or technology-related risks?
Look, I think we need to expand the chapter into cybersecurity overall, and it's not the banks only, but
sure.
I think everybody is a target nowadays. So I think in all these things, becoming a target, I think it can happen any day to anyone, and it's all about what defines you. It's not the event itself, but what defines you really how you respond to the situation. So there are really and build your defenses high. It's I think the answer, and there are really 3 layers of strategic defenses. A, the protection, and B, the detection. If something you sort of your nose getting into the something smelly, and detection of what's going on, and the third one is your response. So if you're using a cognitive systems, the technology, infrastructure, defense barriers, and network traffic, whoever is going to be surfing into your systems, and you sort of have enough surveillance around that, you early detect an abnormal activity and act upon it. So that's the best sort of way. But again, I think it is easier said than done.
Sure.
For some malicious actor, success is really that if he or she is 1 out of 100 gets a hit, it's a success. But for you, success is really 100 out of 100. So again, there is an imbalance in between, right? But again, my sort of short answer is really to keep your defenses high, but it's not only obviously the protection is something, but this detection and your response to containment of the damage is the way how makes your deterrence to these type of malicious acts.
you deal with clients across, a region that has, I should think, if you go to Pakistan and certain areas of the Middle East, there's a variance in the levels of sophistication. I mean, not to say that they're not sophisticated people in all markets. When you're talking to your clients, do you find that some are very proactive about the security? They really get their whole business, that it's not just the bank's responsibility, it's their responsibility too. Do you see a variance, and is there a need for an education amongst clients that they need to be, they're in this with you? It's not just a question of the bank itself being the only responsible party.
Look, I think last 2 years, one of our most highly desired and attracted and attended sort of workshops has always been around cybersecurity. But you see, and we've been doing this for a while, 5-6 years to the extent that I remember. And the audience from our client base, who do they send to these, the workshops, has been changing. Because I think everybody is now understanding this is not an isolated IT department's issue right now. This is very much a boardroom discussion, and the management has to act and manage this like any other risks that they're managing. Because the risks are part of our life. I mean, I manage counterparty risk, I manage credit risk, so on and so forth. So I think to embed it into the culture of the organization, embraced by everyone, the level of awareness, and look, I see what you mean, and from one country to another, this sophistication levels differs. But again, I think let's put into the spectrum of the ecosystem, right, and put digital overall. What happens in China today, or even Kenya, and at a totally different sophistication level than anyone can think of compared to some other countries that you would expect that level of digitization going on, and the whole how ecosystems are created, and the financial inclusion, and how the whole impact to the economy, and so on and so forth. So yes, cyber is one part of it, but again, I think there is a leapfrog effect in all these things, how you digitize yourself. And in some countries are really that skipping a couple of stages, getting into a very high level of digitization, and a level of sophistication comes with managing the cybersecurity risks as well.
Good point, actually, and well made. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Just gentleman at the back there. Do we have a microphone? Anybody? Yes, we do. Good Lord. Well done, sir.
Hello.
Thank you very much. Is it on?
Yeah.
Let's put it on.
Yes. I have a comment on, I believe, Mr. Charles. You said that there should be 5 things in order for fintech to succeed. And the first thing that you mentioned was the regulatory. I really don't agree with that, because I believe being an entrepreneur and entrepreneurship depend on the creativity. If Uber or any other company waited for some regulations to be appeared in order for their business to succeed, I don't believe that they would be existed today. The same thing I believe is applicable for other applications. So I believe we should encourage the creativity first, find new ideas, start to implement them, start to make people like them and use them. Then the regulation will definitely follow that. This is I don't know my.
It's a good question, actually, and let me, if I may, and if I do this wrong, wave your hand. Slightly prescient, but Charles, there's a sort of natural tension between innovation and regulation, and I think actually a number of, I think Mohammed Al-Quaist from the CMA particularly touched on that this morning. How is that best balanced? I mean, the thing about Uber is that in some countries, the taxi system is not particularly regulated.
Even, sorry, in the US, started in the US. The regulations started to question Uber, but by the time Uber have a full floor of lawyers who changed actually the regulatory.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Arguably, the financial system is slightly more regulated than the taxi system. I get it.
Cryptocurrencies is coming as well, you know.
I'm getting your point, but what I'm saying is that the governments might view the financial system as more systemically vital than urban transport. But your point is well made. So how do you balance this need for innovation, you know, with the need to ensure that the regulation is there to prevent disasters?
Great question. So I think we're actually saying similar things. I think what my first point was, and it's not, you know, they weren't ordered in orders of priority, but it was you need an enabling business and regulatory environment, which means that you need to make sure that you're not blocked from the get-go. There needs to be, on one hand, enablement, and on the other hand, a certain level of structure. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to fully define all the regulations before entrepreneurs can move. Quite the contrary. You always have innovation entrepreneurs that are leading the way. But you want to make sure that you have an environment that helps support. So, for example, in the kingdom, this new discussion around this sandbox that's being put together so that any entrepreneur can come in and, you know, whatever idea they have in fintech, they can launch it. And based on that, they can figure out after the fact how to be able to support it from a regulatory perspective and how to be able to make sure institutions make use of it. That's a great example of saying, okay, hold on, let's make sure we enable you as an entrepreneur and let's mold the regulations around it to also make sure that at the end of the day, we're protecting the customer. That's always been the debate when it comes to regulations and fintech is for those 1% of entities that might be fraudulent, how do you protect the funds and the privacy of the customer?
Thank you.
Gentleman in the front row here.
Yeah, my name is Yahya. I just wanted to, regarding cybersecurity, because as Emre was saying that it has to be a culture, that every individual in the organization has to understand it, understand the risks around us. One of the risks which I want to highlight here is social engineering. Okay, and this is something which is biggest threat ever in my mind, I think, because you know you have when everybody is talking about cybersecurity and you're trying to safeguard your systems, but there are telephone lines which are easy to access. So social engineering is where there are actors put on each side of the transaction. And transactions take place. They act as if they were the authorized people on whether corporate side or bank side or whatever. It's the biggest threat today facing because we are all focusing on how to access the system. We make it, maybe a dynamic password, whatever, etc. But there's a less, attention given to social engineering, how to stop it, okay? And also there are various touch points in security. You know, you have even when some mails come, whether you should open it or not. So this is all about awareness and the culture, plus understanding the security, these issues which are emerging, okay? And it has to be actually, social engineering should be itself a topic to discuss because a lot of people don't understand it or know about it. Thank you.
So, good comment. Do you have a question with that, or shall I just sort of finesse one? It's fine, it doesn't matter.
It's not a question. It is it's a contribution.
Yeah, no, great, brilliant. Okay, I just wondered whether you had a question in there and you wanted me to ask it, but I get it.
I tell you honestly, it's not right to put people on spot on something which is emerging. This is something evolving, this threat, and people have not yet internalized it.
Sure.
You understand me? And it's my duty, as an individual human being, that if I understand this is a huge threat, in these forums, I should talk about it as a social responsibility.
No. I'm not being critical of you, sir, in any way. I just couldn't. it's sometimes a little difficult to hear. I just couldn't hear whether you were asking whether there was a question there, so that's fine.
However, now since you asked, I'll ask question.
Now you're going to ask one.
I'll ask to my friend
Please.
question, because if there's an insurance, nobody needs to think about cyber security. We will be paid by them. They will lose trillions of dollars.
Not entirely, unfortunately.
Thank you.
But I welcome what you say. I think cultural awareness, as you suggest, is one of the pieces and a critical element in sort of addressing these exposures. So,
But
I think
I mean, the thing, it partly boils down, and I don't know whether you have an answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. See, I don't mind putting them on the spot. It's not a problem for me. Whose responsibility is it? This is the thing. Is it the private individual? Is it you as the insurer? Is it the government? I mean, I know it's everybody's, but somebody's got to take an initiative on this. And how is that best done?
I think it has to be, as you suggest, it has to be a joint effort. It has to do with culture awareness, regulatory, sort of an improved regulatory environment, and also sort of adequate protection in terms of insurance.
But is it a sort of consumer protection thing? I mean, should it sort of be thought? I mean, if we think of it as that, does that help? Does that help with it, or do where does it fit into the sort of policy apparatus? Because I know that SAMA, for example, they have an important financial consumer protection role, but I don't know whether that extends into the digital space or not. I imagine it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not asking you to comment on specific regulations.
Yeah.
Charles, do you want to come in on this whole business of individual cybersecurity, especially as retail is one of the most important areas, and maintaining that, and whose responsibility that is in order to build a stable ecosystem?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, if you could answer it in one sentence, that would be great.
Sure, I'll give you one sentence. I think that ultimately the financial institution is holding the person's funds, and it's holding a lot of the person's data. So I think that the financial institution absolutely has to take accountability for anything that happens. And unfortunately, the connected world, the world is flat. That means an ever-connected and transparent channel or window into every single activity that takes place and every single mistake that takes place. And how they go about that, I think, has to be communal. So it has to be handled, or the accountability has to be by the financial institution. But how you actually address issues and how you tackle them through social media has to be communal. And I think building those communities ahead of time is pivotal nowadays to being able to properly deal with any sort of circumstance with the customers.
Okay, well, I'm going to... Oh, lady in the front. We've got 2 more questions. Fantastic. You're brilliant. Almost everybody's asked a question. We'll start with the lady first, and then we'll come to the gentleman there. You don't have to ask a question.
Oh,
you can make a comment like the gentleman. It's up to you.
No problem. I actually have a question, so
Thank
thank you all for the great panel. We see that cyber threats are now taking a more national front. Saudi Aramco being hit 4.5 years ago. The elections, which we're still not sure if Russia rigged them or not. But I was wondering, what do you think national ICT entities, like, for example, the one we have here in Saudi, or maybe even financial regulators, given that they are heavily regulating banks, I was wondering, what do you think their role should be in helping probably strengthening the security foundation of at least the banking sector in a highly digitized world?
Great question. Thank you, and a good one to ask. I'm going to start with Emre and come back down there. But is it pivotal that the central authorities have a systemic security role within a financial system such as the Kingdom, for example?
Look, I think my answer will be the same, and I think, at national level, if you put your defenses high alertness level and awareness, and your response time is really that is containing the damage. Because think about it, I think, yes, this exists and it's very much of a reality, and then what do you do with that? And because obviously this digital revolution and how even the social media and this and that, this is not going to stop. It's basically how you manage things, and as like any other risk, and so fundamentally I see that, like, And obviously, look, I think, if you're posting in Twitter or Instagram, which is very public, that you're going on a holiday and you advertise yourself and come back from 5 days after and your house is robbed, then I think, you should rethink about, using the social media. And it's all about starts with the awareness level, and then the education, and then obviously each and every actor, starting with the governments and the infrastructure, has a role to play, including the banks and obviously the data element of it, and so on and so forth. But the users, I think they should, and it's our job, by the way, partly, and the regulators to re-educate, the society and all these things. And this day and age, it's really that, it's the how you respond to things other than.
Sure. Peter, you're nodding your head. So, I mean, is this something that is at the core the responsibility of the central authorities, not just the central bank or the CMA, but the ICT ministry, or
Yeah.
is that systemic? Is cybersecurity on that level the same as national security? I think I'm trying to say. I know that's a huge question, but
Yeah, let me answer that quite shortly. Then I believe it is, and we start to see many such trends. I think the example with the Aramco, the outbreak we had in 2012, and we see sort of other examples as well, are sort of a good example about how real this threat is. And again, but I keep coming back to my quite maybe slightly boring response.
No,
but
your
but I think
insurance, we want you
it's
to be
definitely
boring.
it's a joint effort here. But the companies themselves, as Emre suggests, has to have a critical role here to play as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to say something, Charles?
You can pass.
No. Okay, good. Final question then, because our audience is dying off very quickly as they need to get home.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I think it's a great opportunity to use this fantastic panel. And my question, I would like to raise a question actually on an analytical or critical analysis of the current fintech situation in the Saudi banking financial institution. It's a general question, but I would like to hear your reflection on this, if it's possible.
Sorry, I find it very hard to hear you. Not that it's the wrong question, I just can't. So could you sort of say it again?
Yes, so my question is whether you can give us a critical analysis of the fintech situation in the banking sector in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. A critical analysis. In the sense of saying how advanced is it, or
how advanced, but what also are the opportunities ahead, if that's possible?
Okay. So let's try. I know that you're not in banking.
No, but I'm happy to answer.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
Start with you, then, Peter. What are the opportunities for fintech? It's a good question to finish on. Thank you. What are the opportunities for fintech here in Saudi Arabia, as you see them from your perspective, in the banking and indeed in the wider financial system?
So let me separate a little bit between insurance and the financial sector, because I think in terms they have a slight advantage here. They are a couple of years ahead of the insurance industry in many aspects. What kind of developments do we see? We see, and also I must refer to my earlier statements, I separate between commercial improvements, but also on the retail side. Where I think we have much more sort of disruptive products and systems in place. We start to see, say in the Middle East, we start to see the things like aggregator sites where you can go in, you can quote for your lowest bids and compare to other companies. In the corporate space, very much also driven by the lower interest rate environment. And the fact that the insurance industry very much has an overarching expense issue, you see companies start to work more with operational transformations and then expecting huge savings both from automation and robotics while they're sort of transforming their operational activities.
Okay, that's certainly a big picture vision of the future. Charles, your final remarks on the potential for this in the kingdom?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, and I think you've already seen traction from many, many years ago. Sadad, the bill payment and Sadad account, those are examples of fintech, which maybe we sometimes don't really associate to it, but those are fintech. I think the banks have really moved, night and day in terms of the type of mobile apps that they've launched for banking apps and the type of features that are available. And I think you're starting to see a lot of, smaller players. You have, for instance, Meme on the digital banking front, which was the first digital bank, essentially. So there's a lot of really positive traction. And I think what you're going to start to see is we're still kind of in the ramp-up period, and you're going to start to see an acceleration with everything that's happening with Vision 2030. And you're going to start to see a quick acceleration in this space where we're going to start to see an increasingly strong value proposition for the customers along the different spaces and areas of fintech. And I think the kingdom is extremely well primed for this, looking at it purely from a demand standpoint.
Okay, thank you. And Emre, the final word, what do you think is the potential for this in Saudi Arabia?
During the day, we all, and each and every, either the discussion or the presentation or the panel, we discussed or talk about the Saudi's Vision 2030 National Transformational Plan, which, if you read the, in between the lines, the digitization sits in the, core of it, heart of it, including the financial services. And then I think, look at all the ingredients here. And this is a society almost like 80% of the population carries a supercomputer in their palm. And 40% of this population already either purchased something in the last month using e-commerce. So, but when you look at the cash component, yes, this e-commerce is there, but it's mainly happening around the cash on delivery. And I think Sadad is a great example and a great invention, and just to make it and take it and scale it to, and because all the opportunity is there. And so that's one angle. I think the other angle is obviously the 40% of the population is still either unbanked or underbanked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
So you need to get some sort of a financial inclusion, plan, and I think digital plays a great role here. And I think there are great examples from some other emerging market countries that I was mentioning, and this leap year effect like you can create, and how you sort of make everything as becoming a part of that ecosystem, including mobile operators, including the companies, the banks, and the Sadad itself, so on and so forth. So what I see, again, from a GCC or the Middle East perspective, this is the biggest market, biggest opportunity, and for the success, I think we have all the ingredients in the place. And it's all about making this cultural shift and nurture a entrepreneurial. But again, these are all in the parts of this ecosystem. And fintech is part of it, how banks is going to be transforming it themselves, and so on and so forth.
Okay, that's a great note on which to finish, and I think we heard that the DCM panel finished too. So we are back again here tomorrow morning at I better check what time we start. I think just after 9. With I'll be interviewing the Minister of Housing, and we have a session on real estate, SMEs, so plenty more. But thank you for staying till 5 o'clock, and please thank my panelists for their also staying and for their comments and their time. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in the morning, inshallah.